Hello and welcome to Recovery Cave. My name's Christian and today's video is a little bit different because up until now, all of the videos I've done have been in the fundamentals series and they've all looked at the key concepts of addiction and recovery. And today's video is the first in a new reflection series. And the reflection series will all be about my personal experiences of addiction and recovery and some of what I've learned from them. So over the next 3 videos, I'm going to be telling you the story of how I went from being a bright child with a potentially bright future to becoming physically dependent on alcohol, completely losing control of my life, and eventually finding recovery. And the first part follows the slow descent. So the years where my life looked mainly normal from the outside. I held down jobs, had relationships, went on holidays. But underneath the surface, alcohol was quietly taking control of my life. I think I've always had a sort of fascination with alcohol. Even from when I was really little, I remember when I was 5 or 6 and relatives used to come to stay. At night, I'd crawl round the back of the sofa and I'd be trying to have sneaky sips of their rum and cokes. But I was about 14 when me and my mates started drinking cheap cider in parks and fields on a Friday night. And it was all harmless fun, really. We rarely got into any trouble. Um, I think we all just enjoyed being young and being a bit drunk. And I did very well at secondary school. I got excellent GCSE results and I was also a very good athlete. I went to the English schools national championships a couple of times and I was ranked 6th in the country at one point for long jump. And my parents had very high hopes for me, especially my dad. But by the time I went to college and did A levels, I was far more interested in nights out, drinking, and pursuing the opposite sex than I was with learning. I'd stopped doing athletics in favour of a weekend job, and that was mainly to fun nights out. And I remember really looking forward to being 18, and that wasn't so I could vote or call myself a real adult. It was specifically because I couldn't wait to be able to buy alcohol legally whenever I wanted to. And then I went to Brighton University after a year out, and I went there not to do a particular course that really interested me, but because my girlfriend at the time was going to study at Sussex, which is nearby. And uni was when I started to drink every night. But a lot of people did. There was a big drinking culture at uni, so that suited me really, really well. After university, I decided to stay living in Brighton. I managed to get a job working at a call centre, but I'd amassed about 15 grand's worth of credit card debt whilst at uni and working a low paid job and living in Brighton, which isn't cheap. That debt just got worse over the next year. I ended up quite depressed, just staying in all the time. I ended up splitting up with my girlfriend that I've been with all through uni and moving back home to Essex and in with mum and dad. So after moving back to Essex and in with my parents again, I held down various jobs through my 20s. Had a couple of dead end jobs at first. Then I got a job working for Bang& Olufsen as a salesman, which was pretty cool. And then I got a job working for Lloyd's Bank. and I was advising people on their personal finances, which was ironic even back then. And I drank wine every night, probably under a bottle an evening at that point, but still it was every evening without fail. And I remember even back then, I would panic if there wasn't any alcohol in the house. And I went out with my mates a few times a month, but even then, and living with my parents, my debt was making my finances really hard to manage. But instead of facing that and coming up with a plan, what I decided to do was buy a Nissan 300 ZX twin turbo. And I bought that and decided to have that as my second car. Now, looking back, I think this was partly about trying to fill a hole in my life and to feel like I was keeping up with my friends, because by this point, a lot of them were buying houses and they had nice cars and really decent incomes. And I also thought that if I had a really nice car that I was really proud of, that I would want to go out in the week more in my car and stay in less drinking. But unfortunately, it didn't pan out like that. And I remember at the time I was seeing a girl and she called me up during the week and asked if I wanted to go and see her. And I made some sort of lame excuse. But the truth was, I didn't want to. And I remember her saying, I'd rather sit at home and drink wine than go over and see her. And she was right. I was in a few relationships across this period, and I always made sure that I got with someone that liked to drink. But then it always turned out that I liked to drink more than they did, and also that I liked to drink more than I liked them. And these relationships all followed a similar pattern. There'd be a lovely honeymoon period where lots of drinking was part of the fun and nights out and stuff like that. And then after a few months, I'd normally end up moving in with them. And then the reality of how often and how much I drank would really dawn on them. Then they'd spend time trying to convince me to cut down or to stop, and none of that would work. And they would eventually get fed up with it, fed up with me, and end the relationship. And I never really understood it at the time. I mean, I wasn't a nasty drinker and I was very rarely visibly drunk. And I genuinely didn't get what their problem was. And although my relationships were all ending pretty badly across this period, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Over this period, there were countless nights out and quite a few great holidays away with my mates. And these were all characterized by lots of alcohol and lots of fun. We sailed around Mallorca on a 30-foot yacht. We went on a barge holiday in Birmingham, which was less glamorous, but still lots of fun. And we went to Vegas for 5 nights, where we drank the plane dry on the way there and didn't really stop drinking until we landed just about alive back in the UK. And I don't regret any of those times. I still have some brilliant memories from them and some brilliant stories as well. But I knew that my drinking was different from my mates. I mean, they'd all drink a lot on nights out and on the holidays, but I knew that most of them didn't drink at all during the week, whereas I would drink every single night. And after big nights out on a Saturday night, they would all nurse hangovers the whole of the next day. I would look forward to getting back to mine on Sunday and opening a bottle of wine at about 3, 4 p.m. to drink off my hangover. And by this point, I was drinking at least 2 bottles of wine every evening. And my average morning routine was getting up, being sick, green and yellow bile type stuff in the toilet, fizzing 3 solpadines into a glass of water, downing that, and then driving to work. And I always used to have pretty strong feelings and morals on drink driving, but I realise now that I would have been driving to work over the drink drive limit for years. And my drinking was starting to have more of an impact on my work life as well. So in the past, people had noticed alcohol on my breath in the mornings from time to time, but this was getting more frequent, and it was also causing more days off for me, and that was causing more problems with disciplinaries and things like that. But as my drinking got worse and these consequences started to show, my denial somehow managed to keep up with it and adapt. So in my head, every new problem got a new explanation. Every warning sign became something that the voice in my head could explain away. And looking back now, that's one of the maddest parts of my addiction, was the denial, and how I somehow remained convinced by my own increasingly convoluted explanations. And I used to look forward to getting home from work, getting through the door, and opening a cold bottle of Sauvignon Blanc from the fridge. But by this time, I'd moved that bit forward a bit, and I was leaving work, going straight to a shop, getting a bottle of wine, and having several glugs of that on the drive home from work. And I justified that by thinking that the amount that I was drinking was probably not much more than a pint of beer, so it wasn't really a problem. When I was 32, I got into another relationship, and this partner seemed to be okay with my drinking. And I remember thinking, at last. And it was like a green light for my drinking. And she'd even go to the shops for me when I'd run out of wine. And my debt by this point was over £70,000 on both credit cards and loans. And I had precious little to show for it. But I did have another go at filling a big hole in my life with another daft car. And this time it was a bigger hole, so it had to be a bigger car. So I got this Mercedes CL 500. And of course, I used that as my second car because driving that around all the time would have been silly. And my brother and his family have lived in Sweden for many years. And in August 2014, I went over to visit them along with my sister and her family. And on the last night there, we went out for a lovely meal and I ate some reindeer, which was a first for me. And then later in the evening, and several drinks later, I was showing off my somersault skills on my brother's trampoline, and I managed to break my arm. Now, I managed to find the video of this the other day. It's relatively unspectacular, but just a warning that you do hear my bones snap, which is a bit unpleasant.
Are you alright?
No,
Oh, I should
I
press
think I've
stop.
dislocated my arm.
Are you okay?
No.
And you can also hear my sister laughing as I do it. But to be fair, at the time, she didn't know the seriousness of what I'd just done. And it was a pretty serious break, spiral fracture. And I was lucky, really, to be given the okay to fly home the next day. But I wasn't going to be able to drive for quite a while, and I wasn't going to be able to work either. In fact, I'd end up being off work for 17 weeks. And by this point, I'd pretty much moved in with my new partner, and she worked part time. So she'd get up in the morning, get her kids ready for school, take them to school, and then most days she'd be at work all day. So I'd be in the house with my broken arm by myself. I ended up getting very bored and actually quite depressed, and my drinking crept earlier and earlier into the day. And it became apparent that my work routine was really the last bit of glue that was kind of holding my life together. And then one morning, I waited for them to leave and I retched and puked up the green stuff as normal, but the nausea just wouldn't go away. And I instinctively knew that the only way I could make it go away would be to drink more. So it felt a little bit dirty, but I did it. I downed a load of wine out of the bottle from the fridge, and sure enough, after 10 or 15 minutes, the nausea settled. But I'd crossed another line, and this was a big one because up until then, the battle with alcohol had really just been in my head. But now, alcohol had taken physical control of my body. Now, you'd like to think that by this point, my denial would just throw in the towel and give up. And it's hard to think of how I could possibly justify the notion that I was still in control at this point. But my denial didn't give up, it adapted. I went into a sort of survival mode, and denial's new role in that was to try and convince me that I could work this out and get through it somehow. I drank secretly every morning, waited till my girlfriend had gone on the school run and downed enough wine to make the nausea settle. And when she wasn't at work, it was a bit trickier. I had to sneak a glug of wine or vodka in, just enough to keep myself level until I could have my first official drink of the day at sort of early afternoon time. And then I could relax, at least for the rest of that day. And my arm had taken a very long time to heal. But by this point, it was getting there. And I'd put off going back to work as long as I possibly could. But I couldn't put it off forever. And sure enough, the morning came when I found myself sat in my car in my work suit, waving goodbye to my girlfriend as I set off for my first day back. And I had a little Tropicana bottle that was half full of vodka and half full of orange. And I was sipping that on the way to work, just trying to quell the nausea ever so slightly. And still, no one knew, apart from me, that I was physically dependent on alcohol. And I knew that on my first day back that I was going to have to be observed doing my job by a manager. And I was sat in my office and I was just in a state of utter panic. I couldn't stop the nausea, I couldn't stop being sick in the toilet, and I just didn't know what to do or how I could get through this. And about 10 a.m. ish, I just had a complete and total meltdown. And I don't remember doing it, but I left work, got in my car, and just drove off. I don't even know where I was going. Presumably, I was trying to get home. The next thing I remember, I was pulling off a slip road up towards a roundabout, and I suddenly realised that I was about to hit the car in front. And I slammed my brakes on, but it was too late. I hit the car in front. And I remember getting out and I tried to exchange details with the people that I just hit, but I couldn't remember my own mobile number. And again, in some weird form of panic, I just got back in my car and just left the scene. And on the next dual carriageway I was on, I suddenly saw flashing lights in my rearview mirror. So the people I'd hit had obviously phoned the police, quite rightly so, either because I'd just driven off or because I clearly wasn't right. But anyway, I pulled off the dual carriageway at the next junction and came to a stop under the underpass. And the policeman got out of his car and came up to the driver's window and asked me if I'd been drinking. And I said no. And then I did a breathalyzer and I blew 176. And the legal limit in the UK is 35. And then I vaguely remember being taken out of my car, handcuffed, and put into the back of the police car. And next week's video will be part 2 of my story, where I'm afraid to say things don't really get much better. But if you'd like to see it, subscribing to the channel means you won't miss it. And if you've enjoyed part 1, giving it a like would really help me out and I would really appreciate it. Until next time, take care of yourselves and I'll see you soon.